Hello and welcome to Japanese Acupuncture Today, the Hangouts on Air show that brings together experts from the many different styles of Japanese acupuncture. I'm your host, Oran Kivity, and on today's show we are going to peer behind the smoky veil of Moxibustion. I'm joined by two people who are not just experts in the field, they are also ardently passionate about the benefits of Moxibustion. From Germany, MD and Toyohari practitioner Sascha Groebe, and from the UK, Merlin Young, co-founder of Mox Africa, the charity seeking to combat drug-resistant disease in Africa with Moxibustion. I too am passionate about Moxa, and I can't tell you how happy I am to have such a high-powered panel today. I'd like to start off with you, Sascha. You're a medical doctor, so setting fire to people and burning them is even more wacky than sticking pins in them. Why would a doctor become so passionate about Moxibustion?
Yeah, it's unusual for doctors doing that here in Germany, but I kind of had an unusual career, so that matches. So when I was in medical school, I was sick in hospital, and after 10 days of unpleasant treatments, I asked the chief surgeon, what can I do not to get that disease again? And he said, oh, I don't know. Next time we do surgery straight away. And from that time on, bad, that I can't do anything. And things happen. And so I went to an acupuncturist. And he told me about qi and blah, blah, blah. And he did acupuncture on me. And it kind of worked. And so after 5 treatments, I went myself to acupuncture teacher, and that was Dr. Rada Tambirac in Berlin in the 90s. And probably on the 3rd or 4th weekend, she said this sentence never left my head again, and that was, if you enter an acupuncture clinic, she had this nice word, if you enter an acupuncture clinic and you don't smell moxa, turn around and run. So this is a Chinese traditional medicine is a wide part, and moxa was kind of left out in the teachings. So I always was curious, where's more moxa? And after my more Chinese education, I then had Japanese teachers and was introduced into moxa, and then I did a Moxa course with Junji Mizutani, and I tried various styles, and now I do Moxa kind of every day. So what makes me do Moxa is it works. It's easy, it's straightforward, people like it actually. And my patients, they kind of really like the smell, and they come into my clinic and say, if I smell that, I already feel better. So it's probably the smell always was a problem, especially in a doctor's clinic, but the patients kind of like it.
Sascha, for the benefit of our viewers, you've got some footage of you doing some small cone Moxibustion on a patient. Can you talk us through what's happening here?
Yeah, I first do
okay, so you're just going to
roll a video. Sorry?
Yeah, you're just going to roll a video of the...
Okay, here you see, so it was a tutorial, so this is the arm of a model patient, and there you see the moxa, which is a good quality and it's yellow, and you roll it in your fingers and you get a half-grain size piece of moxa, and you place it on the skin, you moisten the skin before, and then you need an incense, and you light it on the top, and then it burns right down to the skin, which can be very hot. And so I squeeze a little bit with my fingers, and it takes the air away and the burning stops. There are various ways to do that. We see now another one which burns straight down, and there's something you rarely see. Now, when it hits the skin, you see this red flare on the skin. This is actually, you can see qi move there. Now there's a third way. You place the next cone on the edge of the other and light it again from the top. And then you can use a Fukuya bamboo to reduce the amount of air, and it's more pleasant. And here you can see nicely that there is redness around that. It's about 1 centimeter to 2 centimeters. So this is one of the effects of direct moxibustion, that you increase blood flow here and you increase chi flow for 2 things you can do. Now I'm back.
So you've actually burnt the skin there on that second cone. You let it burn all the way down until the skin burnt. Is that
yes,
right?
I did. But I usually don't do that so often because that can be very painful. But if you use very small cones, you can do that. And if you have, it depends on the patient. If you have a very sensitive patient, you won't do it. If you have an excess situation, painful heat situation, you probably do it on purpose. And you gotta tell your patients that there can be small blistering and stuff like that, but usually that is not a problem for most people.
Okay. Merlin, you're so passionate about moxibustion, you've even written a book on it, probably the finest book in the English language on the subject. Now you've gone and founded a charity that attempts to bring ancient wisdom to contemporary diseases. Why Moxa?
Right, okay, well, let me give you a bit of background, I think, first. I originally trained as an acupuncturist. We were told in acupuncture school that Moxa is really important, plays a big role, but nobody actually talked with any authority at all about Moxa. Nor did anybody really explain how it worked or any real background to it at all. I think we spent 1 afternoon, 2 afternoons on it, and that was pretty much it. Because Moxa is very, very simple to do, which is part of its power, I think. It's part of its real, you know, what it has to offer is its simplicity. After I qualified as an acupuncturist, I did you know, postgraduate, I guess you call it, training, and one of the things I came across was the North American Journal of Oriental Medicine, NAJOM. And at the time, Junji Mizutani, the editor, was putting in every edition. He would be putting in sort of Moxa articles, and I was really struck by this. I was really struck that you could actually, apparently, use special points and use these very, very small cone techniques to create very, very powerful effects on the body. I did some training after that with Steve Birch. He did a 2-day Moxa workshop, if my memory serves me right. And during that Moxa workshop, we did various types of Moxa treatment. But one of the things we did was this small cone technique, which, frankly, I wasn't too struck by at the time because it's fiddly, and I'm a little bit of a cautious practitioner. I don't like burning people. So I was a little bit cautious about it. But one of the things that Steve said in the course of the workshop was he related how Moxa had been used. This type of Moxa had been used during the 1930s in the immediate decades prior to the advent of tuberculosis drugs for treating TB, and successfully treating TB. He claims of successfully treating TB. And it's one of those things that kind of goes in your head and stays there. And frankly, at the time, I knew almost nothing about tuberculosis. Probably less than I knew about Moxa, frankly. But just a few years later, the modern phenomenon of tuberculosis as a neglected disease, a huge problem, but also as an emergent disease as it becomes more and more drug resistant, started coming into my consciousness, I guess you call it. And one night, in a course of conversation, it suddenly occurred to me, well, if this treatment was being used before the drugs were working, then surely to God it could be used after the drugs don't work anymore. In other words, with drug-resistant cases that are described in various ways as being therapeutically futile, which is an awful way of describing somebody who basically is not going to get better from a lethal disease. So that was the start of it, really. And after a lot of research, I realized that actually the Chinese have been using it, very aggressive treatments for treating tuberculosis. This is going back several centuries, in fact going back 14 centuries. And but this modern technique, this particular Japanese technique using these very small combs, seemed to be the way forward, because it's very safe and because it appears to create this immunotherapeutic effect, which seems to counteract the way the disease works.
Okay, so I'd like to move on now to specifics. What does Moxa actually do? And I grew up with a Chinese model. It's in TCM. It's used to treat intransigent disease, and it was used for longevity, and it was used to prevent disease. And it warms the meridians and expels cold and damp. And also it's used to induce the smooth flow of qi and blood. And finally, we say in Chinese medicine anyway that it warms the yang. So I'd like to ask both of you, what commonalities are there with Japanese Moxa theory, and what makes Japanese Moxa theory so different? Merlin. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I think the interesting thing about Japanese Moxa is that the Moxa is more refined. The material that's used is more refined. This is specifically for direct Moxa, which is very rarely used in China these days. In China, most of the Moxa that's used is pole Moxa or stick Moxa, so it's indirect. Whereas here we're talking specifically, or rather certainly as regards the work that I've been involved in, it is direct Moxa, small cones, very small cones. And I think probably in the 17th century, in the Edo period in Japan, there was this advent of a new tradition in Japan of blind practitioners doing acupuncture. And I think it actually probably, because of that, interest in sighted practitioners in Moxa grew, because blind practitioners couldn't basically develop or investigate Moxa the way that they could. So as a result, the corpus, for want of a better word, of Moxa in Japan is a lot more expansive than it is in China. In China, actually, traditionally, very few points are used for Moxa. It's the same old. There's about 8 or 10 points that are used, whereas in the Japanese traditions, a lot of points are used on the basis of palpatory reactions, or simply on the case of empirical evidence. They just seem to do something, including a lot of extra points that are either non-meridial or are non-standard meridian points. So it's more, in a very Japanese way, it's more refined, but it's also much more expansive as a treatment. But what I would say is that the same ideas about treating intransigent disease, I think, apply. In fact, possibly apply even more so than with the Chinese methods. And you don't have, certainly as regards direct Moxa, you don't have this problem of very aggressive treatment causing big blisters and stuff, which basically can't be done in modern clinics.
In fact, often we say in Japanese acupuncture that Moxa is working on the level of blood and needles are working on the level of qi. So in other words, if it's on the blood level, it's a chronic problem and has been there a long time, then you must use Moxa in order to shift it. Sascha, you've been working for a long time with Moxa. Do you have any comments on those differences between Japanese and Chinese Moxa theory?
Well, I'm more the practical guy, so I don't spend much time with theories. But the Chinese Moxa I know is, as Merlin said, like pole Moxa, and basically you put Moxa over areas and you warm areas, and it has the warming effect, and it's comfortable for the patients, and especially on the back they like it, like Moxa box or some stuff like that. But if you want to have more specific effects and meridian effects, or effects that are special for a certain area, a direct Moxa is much more clearer addressed. And so, for example, there's a disease or a situation in women which is called PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, something like that in German, and they tend not to have their period regularly because of misbalance of hormones. And I have a couple of female patients who really made from no period or like one period in 6 months to something like every 30 days with home Moxa on a point like spleen 6. And I treat them probably once a month, and they treat nearly every day themselves, and they can, which is, it's a chronic disease, and you can't really change the situation in the ovaries, but you can change the hormone homeostasis. So this is a great effect, I think, and it's just one. And there are other possibilities, but that's what came to my mind firsthand now.
Okay. In Chinese acupuncture, we're often told that we can't use Moxa for hot conditions, but this doesn't seem to be the case in Japanese Moxa. Surely it makes sense that something hot is going to make a hot condition worse. So what's the thinking here, and what's differed between Chinese and Japanese acupuncture here?
Shall I answer this question?
Yes,
I'll have a go at it. I think there are several possible misunderstandings here. The idea that heat can't be treated with Moxa, or heat conditions can't be treated with Moxa, is not a hard and fast rule, even in Chinese traditions. There was a text, it was a Ming Dynasty text called, I think it's called A Drop of Snow on a Red Hot Stove, which discussed whether heat, because there were contraindications, but it discussed it and basically proposed that Moxa could be used for heat conditions. So it's not quite as simple as it's sometimes described. There is a couple of factors here. One is that certainly as Chinese traditions became of age in the 20th century with the development of TCM, acupuncture and Moxibustion, along with everything else, got herbalized. So it was trying to be homogenized into one box, and as a result of that, the properties of mogwort, the plant that is used for processing Moxa, is a warm or hot herb. So logically, well, you shouldn't be using, if you're using it internally, you shouldn't be using it for a heat condition, and that, I'm sure that's a very, very sensible precaution. But the traditions, there is a lot of treatments that have been used for heat. One thing is to blow a fever out, so you might use Moxa in a more dispersive way, where you're burning the Moxa very hot. There's an idea, I think I came across it from a Korean Moxa specialist actually, who proposed that Moxa can act a bit like a sort of valve. So if you put a certain amount of heat in, you stimulate with a certain amount of heat, you get the heat goes into the body. If you put too much heat, the heat comes out of the body. It's like a reverse a reverse response. So you might want to actually treat it with a heat condition. Funnily enough, one of the things that I've personally been accused of is how could you use Moxa for treating tuberculosis? Tuberculosis you've got a lot of fever going on. It's a yin deficient condition. Well, interesting. I rest my case in that case, because it very clearly to me is effective and very supportive for patients who've got tuberculosis.
Oh. In fact, I'm looking at Sascha's video again. I'm thinking that you were using it on large intestine 11, Kikuchi.
Yes.
So that is a point that's used to clear heat very often. And we are advised in Japanese acupuncture to use that point for Gokoku large intestine 4 to clear heat, particularly for skin conditions like itchy or red skin conditions. So in actual fact, we are commonly using hot moxa or small cone moxibustion at least to treat heat conditions. So I think that's quite interesting. Yeah.
Probably I comment on that, Oran. I think a heat condition is not all over the body usually. So if we use like distal points, like if the head is like feverish or something, and we do moxa on the lower parts, so we're trying to balance the body and not to increase heat. And same with large intestine 11. It's for problems on the face or skin reactions, and some practitioners use it to counter effect like cold flu or something like that. And but in the books and clinically, you can see it draws the chi down. And if you go just 1 centimeter down to large intestine 10, it's used with moxa to lower blood pressure. So to me, it's just how you do it. And as Merlin said, you can do dispersive moxa technique and you can do tonifying just as you do with the needle. And that's the important part. And yeah, you won't do on a red swollen head with headaches, you won't do probably moxa on the head. Okay, but I think that's easy to understand.
Yeah. Interestingly, the last time I was in Japan, a friend of mine took me to what I can describe as a moxa salon. They were selling stick-on moxa cones, the Chinetsuku, Senenkyu Ibuki, which are small little cigars on a self-adhesive cardboard base, which the public can stick onto their skin and like do at home. And it was like the ground floor was like a shop, and there were just shelves upon shelves upon shelves of different flavored cones. And then upstairs there was a treatment area where loads of people were sitting around having moxa stuck to their head and to their neck and to their arms, and so it was really fascinating to see. But I bought a book from them which was full of formula for points, and I was amazed to see how commonly used Daitsue Du 14 is. It's not a point that I had previously thought of as one that I would use moxa very much, but nearly every formula for every disease used Du 14. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Probably it is said that Du 14 is the meeting point of the yang meridians. So to increase yang, that would be one idea, because a lot of people are tired and overworked, and especially in Japan. So probably they mix that in every formula.
Yeah.
And one of my acupuncture teachers used Du 20, a sedative needling against the flow of the meridian, on every patient in Berlin, because he said they're all crazy. They need to calm down. I never did that.
We've been using the term moxibustion very loosely so far. After all, there are all kinds of moxibustion. There's direct, indirect, blistering, scarring, small cone and large cone. But looking on the internet, it doesn't make these distinctions. If you search the effects of moxibustion online, the net is filled with posts about moxa increasing the white blood cell count. But Merlin, you've made the point in your book that this research relates purely to small cone moxibustion. So what do we know of the effects of other kinds of moxibustion? For example, Kyutoshin, moxa on the handle of the needle.
Yeah, I think that's a difficult question. I actually can't really give a very authoritative answer on that, because as far as I can see, there's not a lot of research on it. I would have thought that there are several things. With Kyutoshin, you're using a needle as well as the heat. You're plainly creating an infrared effect around the needle, a bit like having a lamp over it, but you're also sending heat down the needle. So I think it's a complex treatment. What it does is relax the patients, and also can really very, very significantly relax very tight muscles. As regards having an immunological effect, I would be more cautious in making any claims for that. There is some research for immunological effects using Moxa sticks, Moxa poles, mainly done on animals, I think. But so there appears to be some immunological effect from indirect Moxa, but it seems to me there's complex mechanisms going on with this small cone direct Moxa. And
there's an image of Kyutoshin. What I describe to my patients normally is just, I say this is a muscle relaxant. It's as simple as that. It's warming and it's relaxing to the body. There we go.
I wouldn't want to treat a patient with back pain without Kyutoshin unless their pain gets worse if they have a hot bath, which is very rare. Yeah.
Okay. How about Chinetsku? So cone Moxa. Do we know anything about the effects of cone Moxa? And this is large cones of Moxa that are placed on the skin. I think we have an image of that as well. Chinetsku.jp.
Should I answer that?
Yes, please do.
Well, I would refer to Stephen Birch's theory, which he told me, that we have kind of different layers of our energy system, and like the inner layer is the organ system and like cells actually working, and then we have kind of the meridian system, and then we have something which he is calling vital chi, or we in Western worlds probably could use the word aura. So the outer part of the energy system. And Chinetsku in tonification mode, which just burns down very little, like 1/3 of the height of the cone, seems to tonify this all over yang, or this all over vital chi. And I use it for that purpose, probably mostly at the end of the treatment, and it really gives like an extra polish to the treatment, and it can be very useful for pretty much run-down patients who can't take a lot of other treatments because they're easily overdosed. So I like Chinetsku, and it should be done carefully, because I remember one patient freezing, coming outside, and I said, oh, the belly is cold, I do a little Chinetsku, and I let them burn down too much, and this patient didn't stop shivering for the next hour, regardless of what I did. So you can do dispersive treatment with Chinetsku, and you don't need much. You don't need heat perception by the patient to have a tonifying effect in Chinetsku. So you have to decide when to take it off.
I think I'd agree with you that I use Chinetsku very much when I want to lower the dose of the Moxa, and I use it with kids because kids like to see the volcano. I call it mini volcanoes. Yeah, so kids once you get them making the cones themselves, and then you kind of, their ones aren't very good, but you kind of get by. Then it's a great one to do with kids and with people who are very weak.
Can I add a little bit?
Yeah.
I think it's interesting what you've just described, Sascha, because my understanding is that this large cone Chinetsku technique was originally developed by Keiri Inoue, who's an early meridian therapist, and he specifically used it dispersively, and so the fact that if you burn it too hot, it clearly creates dispersive effects is fundamental to the technique, I think. But I think that the trick that was added to possibly by Fukushima Kodo was that you can use this. You can use this in a supplementary way, or tonifying way, with just burning a very small amount of it down, and it's dramatic. The effect it has on the pulse is dramatic, and it seems to me that the primary difference between maybe a Chinetsku technique and the small cone direct Moxa technique, Tonetsku technique, would be that Chinetsku can tonify very much at the chi level. Whereas with the Tonetsuki, with the small cone direct moxa, you may be working with some chi, but also, the theory, the basic theory within the Japanese acupuncture traditions is that you're working also with the blood level of a disease, which is a slower effect, for more chronic disease. So I think that that's a key difference between the two techniques.
I'd like to bring the topic back to small cone moxibustion and the treatment of TB. So this was something that, as you mentioned, Dr. Hara had researched in the pre-antibiotic era in Japan, and that you, Merlin, have been attempting to revive in the drug-resistant era in Africa. So we're actually planning to do a whole show later about Mox Africa in the near future. But can you give us a thumbnail of the project and what you're trying to achieve?
Sure. Dr. Hara was only one of various practitioners who definitely were treating TB in the 1930s in Japan. There was a lot of TB in Japan in the 1930s. They had a serious epidemic on their hands. So it's a very common disease and cut right across society. Dr. Hara is a very interesting character. He definitely was somebody who walked his talk. He advocated daily moxa at stomach 36. He lived to the ripe old age of 108. His last 3 months of his life, he was actually officially the oldest male in Japan, which is an achievement in Japan for sure. He developed this protocol, a very simple protocol, using stomach 36 and 8 points. They're non-meridial points on the lower back, and the beauty of them are that they're not difficult points to locate, and they're in discrete part of the body, and they're also in a part of the body which supposedly is less sensitive than the rest of the body as well, less sensitive to heat. So it's an ideal treatment. Sawada Ken also treated TB with moxa. His treatment points were much more complicated. There was more of them, but the location particularly was much more complicated. So we ended up looking more at Dr. Hara's protocols and his documentary evidence. But the beauty of Dr. Hara's documentary evidence is that his claims about white blood cell count are exactly the ones that tend to get quoted in these websites, which you referred to earlier. It raises white blood cell count for 8 hours, blah blah, comes down. Also, this is from research that was done in 1929. And it's getting quoted erroneously for stick moxa, definitely. But he also did a study on different groups of rats guinea pigs, I beg your pardon, who he infected with tuberculosis. One group he was treating with moxa before he infected them. Another group he treated the same day as he infected them, began treatment. Another group withheld treatment for a couple of weeks, and the fourth group is his control group, because guinea pigs have no defense against TB, so they will die. They will die invariably if they're infected with tuberculosis. And what he saw was a very clear response across that spectrum. Is the ones who were treated before with moxa were the ones who survived the longest. So this, to me, is pretty compelling evidence, even to this day. And to my knowledge, it is the only scientific evidence that's ever been done on the use of moxa with tuberculosis. So we're picking up where he left off, basically, and we're working with humans this time.
Right. Okay. Well, I think it's going to be a fascinating show when we talk about Mox Africa, and we'll get some more of your team on board. But I'd like to move on from that, because there are more practical uses in the West as well for this kind of moxibustion to increase your immunity, particularly in the treatment of chemotherapy. Do either of you have experience of using moxa for chemotherapy?
I'm going to jump in here because I'm nearly as passionate about this as I am about the potential of moxa with TB. With chemotherapy, it strikes me, and I'm sure Sascha will advise me if I'm wrong with his medical background, but it strikes me the critical thing with chemotherapy is keeping the white blood cell count up so you can complete the treatment. If you fail to complete the treatment, you're probably a lot worse off than you were before you start. And in my personal experience, I would say that acupuncture can help pick up the white blood cell count, but only in a limited way. So the classic pattern that I would see with a patient, if I'm treating a patient through course of chemotherapy, is that introducing just acupuncture will lift the white blood cell count, but it will then begin to crash again. At that point, if you introduce Moxa, say for instance on a very simple protocol using something exactly like the Dr. Hara protocol, introduce stomach 36 on a daily basis, and you'll find that the white blood cell count will almost certainly lift again, which means that basically you can keep the treatment going. Now that also just those 2 points is likely to be overpowered by the chemotherapy in a lot of cases, if the chemotherapy obviously is strong as well. And at that point you can introduce these back points with the Dr. Hara treatment, and at that point, in my opinion and my experience, the white blood cell count will lift once again, in which case potentially you can keep a patient to the extent that they will successfully complete a course of chemotherapy, where otherwise the chemotherapy would have to be withdrawn. Mm-hmm. So I think that this is it's definitely a for research as well as a field for wider implementation. I don't know, Sascha, whether you'd correct me on anything there or whether you'd add anything.
Yeah, I don't have your experience. I'm treating patients undergoing chemotherapy, but mostly of them I treat them because of nausea and feeling tired and freezing and loss of appetite, and probably I end up doing points like stomach 36 and probably others. I didn't do it quite to increase the white blood count, so I can't say anything from my clinical experience. But it seems to me very clearly that things can happen, and I can add a pretty much interesting anecdote on that. One of our fellow colleagues came to my clinic, and he was sick. He was very sick. He had like 40 degrees of fever, and I thought he had a acute kidney infection. And I took his blood count and admitted him to hospital. And he didn't go. And went home and did 200 cones of direct Moxibustion on Ren 6 or 4, I can't remember. He showed up the next day, and his blood count, white blood count, was 25,000, and he had a C-reactive protein, which is an indication for bacterial infection, which was like 20 or 100 times over the limit on the day before. And he came back next day in perfect shape, and I just couldn't believe it. And I checked his blood count again on the next day, and it was back to normal. And his and even these parameters of infection were nearly normal. So he did a radical treatment on a disease I would have sent to hospital, which would be treated with antibiotics for sure, and he cured himself with Moxibustion. So the effects of increasing immunity and counterattack bacteria seem to me obvious in that case, but it's for the strong.
Yeah, I've got two questions to ask you about that. So what was the condition of his tummy? I mean, had he scarred himself or blistered himself?
Yes, it was like a big cone of money. In Germany it was 2 euros, probably more than a silver dollar or something like that. It was burned all over, and it healed over weeks. But he was, he didn't mind. He thought he did a very good treatment on himself, and he was right. And
okay, my second question to you relates to Yeah, because you're teaching this stuff to doctors. I mean, how do you go about teaching such a weird and disfiguring therapy to fellow doctors?
Yeah. Well, just an idea that came to my mind. I have a guy who is selling needles and Moxa, and we asked him if he could get like good Moxa from Japan, and he had to go to Japan, meet the people in person, got introduced to the senior, and so he was able to bring good quality Moxa to Europe, which doesn't earn him any money, because it's like 1% of his business is Moxa. So I had the idea we should do something for Moxa, and I had the idea of doing this Moxa Academy. So we called it DocSafe, which is the company Moxa Academy, and because he's selling like millions of needles to doctors who do a lot of acupuncture in Germany, like orthopedic doctors, and they're like 30,000 needles a month. So that's quite a lot. So we sent all to them an invitation for a one-day course on Moxibustion, covering pole, Moxa, Moxa box, Q-Shin, direct Moxa, Chinetscu, and it was a hand-on training course, like in small groups for 6 person, and my clinic was just all smoke all over. But we had a lot of fun, and they were impressed what you can. And I made them treat each other, so they all could feel and do, which is, from my perspective, the best way to learn. And this was very good, but after 3 courses, nobody answered again. So we had, like, in Germany, on the doctor side, and I think there are 40,000 certified acupuncturist, medical doctors who do acupuncture and did whatever course at acupuncture school, and from them, like 100 responded to our invitation, and that was the part who was interested, and there's nobody left. So we sat together with that Moxa manufacturer and Merlin and Jenny, and we said, okay, we have to bring Moxa to the people and to the public, which is because it's unknown. In a lecture on a congress, I said Moxa is the orphan sibling of acupuncture, and if you see the Chinese characters, it's burning and stitching. So, and the burning part was left behind, and it's only the putting needle into people. And probably the whole Moxa part is not taught. And I tried to fill in that gap, and with little success. So, and
okay, Sascha, maybe this would be a good time to start to discuss common diseases. For example, how would you treat something simple like colds and flus with Moxa? And what about cough? I mean, I think some of the people watching the show will want some tips on how to bring small cone Moxibustion into their practice. Do either of you have experience of treating colds or flus or coughs you'd like to share? Merlin.
I guess the first area which would be interesting to look at would be the upper back. I think this possibly takes us to one of the fundamentals, I think, of a Japanese approach. This is particularly for using small cone Moxa, is that you're looking for reactive points. So I have to say, in my book, and that's only my book, I'm not saying it's the right book, but in my book, I just forget about the points. I'm looking for reactions. So I'm going to definitely have a look around do 12. I'm definitely going to have a look around bladder 11, bladder 12, but bladder 13. But if I don't find anything there, I'm going to look a little bit wider. And if I find something on the small intestine channel, to be frank, I'll go for it. So I think it's looking for reactive points in certain areas. Also, obviously, for obvious reasons, I look on the lung channel, lung 5, halfway down the lung 6 area, but it needn't necessarily be in the lung 6 area, lung 7 as well. So it's more a case of I think a condition taking you to an area and then looking for reactive points as much as definitely going for specific points, and they're the ones that always do the trick. Although probably there are, for some practitioners, certain points that always do the trick.
Well, I think for cough, Shakutaku lung 5 is probably one of the classic points. But you really have to find, as you say, you really have to find a reaction somewhere around the cubital crease. It needs to be some kind of induration.
Yeah, and of course there's a special stop coughing point, and that seems to occur either above or below lung 5, just to make life a little bit more fun. So we're looking at, maybe a Holzun above, a Holzun below. We're looking at a whole area, and then go for the most reactive point. That would be my theory.
So I mean, that's why some people call Japanese acupuncture, they stopped calling it Japanese acupuncture and they call it palpation-based acupuncture, because you're reading the body with your hands and you're looking at the channels and you're trying to feel for those reactions that really want treatment. Sometimes people ask me, well, how many cones should I do on a point? And I think it's, for me, the answer is when the reaction changes, that's when you stop. So it might change after 3, or it might change after 5, or maybe 7 cones. But it's when that tenderness or induration changes, then that's when the point has been treated.
Yeah, probably I add to that.
Yeah, please do.
If you treat a point and you don't see a reaction, like no redness, no moist, whatever, it's either the wrong point or you haven't treated as much as it's needed. So this is sometimes hard to get, but if the point reacts, and some points, like special points we use, like Oranaitai or Shitsumin, which are on the foot, you treat them as long till the patient feels the heat. And it could be 50 cones before they feel it. So sometimes you have the patient who's telling you when it's enough, and sometimes it's your judgment how the point changes under treatment.
How about home Moxa? I'm thinking in particular of my patients with fertility issues. I frequently get them to go home and do Moxa as homework. So are there home Moxa routines that you give to your patients? Do you teach your patients to do home Moxa?
I personally think this is the secret of Moxa. It's about doing little and often, little by little cones, little by little dosage, and doing it on a daily basis, which means that actually for a lot of, particularly we're talking about chronic disease, coming back to this intransient disease issue, I think that to expect to get a good response with Moxa from just weekly treatment, adding Moxa onto acupuncture, I think is optimistic, but I think you can get much more out of it if you're doing it on a regular basis. I think some people have interpreted the character for I can only say it in Chinese. Oh no, it's a Q character, but the Zhu character in Chinese as being, it's something that reflects something that takes a long time. So it should be done over a long period of time. Whether that's true or not, I'm not too sure, but I think personally it's very important for a lot of patients. And the point that I almost invariably first teach patients if they're doing Moxa at home is going to be stomach 36, because it's easy to find a reaction. It's an easy point to self-administer. But there are other ways of doing it as well. Within the Tai Harry model, you can use 8 extraordinary vessel pairs. Or if there's fertility issues, you might want to use Moxa on the abdomen. Of course, you might want to use Moxa on the lower back, and that adds problems if you've only got a patient and no helper. But
right.
But it would help if they have the helper.
Yeah, well, very often someone with fertility issues is going to have a partner standing by. Often my post sessions become a smoky lesson.
Yeah.
I'd like to mention something for those people who are watching who would like, would like a handle on where to find out about prescriptions for Moxa. And I think that's on Amazon. You've now released, it's the Matsushima. You've now released The Moon Over Matsushima, a Kindle single, which is easily downloadable, particularly if you're in Europe and the US. I think it's harder to download if you're in if you're in Asia. But the Kindle single is just a collection of the formula from your main book, so that people can use it as an easy guide and can look up reproductive things or respiratory problems and can find the condition and then actually find a prescription of points from which to select. I think it's a really, really useful thing to do, and we'll put a link to that at the end of the show. And that's a very useful clinical guide for practitioners. I think another place that people can look for information about Moxa is Najom itself. And Junji Mizutani, who sadly couldn't be on the show today, has compiled many, many different things and writings about Moxibustion into a bound volume, and that's downloadable from the Najom website, najom.ca. I'd like to ask you both about how you integrate Moxa into your practice. How do you integrate Moxa with needling? Sascha, you said that if there's no smell of Moxa in the practice, you should run a mile. So are you doing Moxa with everybody?
Nearly everybody, to be honest. Well, I like it, and it's like this direct contact with the patient. It's repetitive, and it's kind of slow, and you're really taking care about your patients, and you're very close. They kind of like that, and you're focused on the point. So usually I do Toyohari treatment, which is based on root treatment and branch treatment. So I do the needling first, usually, not always, but usually. And for supportive treatment and symptomatic treatment, I kind of use Moxa, and I treat direct Moxa, and I treat a lot of pain patients. Like probably 70% of my patients are due to pain, orthopedic pain, and other pains. So there are probably joints to treat and extrameridian couples on that way, or especially for back pain, I love points like Yozen, which is between the last lumbar, how's it called, vertebra and the sacral area, which is, this point can work wonders, and I tell my fellow colleagues, if you only learn that point, you already have a benefit in your clinic. So
Yosen, are you using with small cone Moxibustion again, or are you using?
Yes. Yeah. Exclusively. I think, or what I heard, and it's useless to put a needle in there. So I do a Moxa, and sometimes it's the only point I treat on the back, and sometimes I use bladder 27, which is just on the side. It's I think it's called in Chinese the 17th vertebra or something like that. These are nice points to treat, and when you have, as mentioned before, if you want to finish your treatment with a kind of a boosting effect, then Genetio comes into place. And I teach my patients to do home Moxa, and it can be like easy things, like they have pain on the foot, like this hallux valgus, which is quite common. And if they do not daily Moxa, but 2 times a week, they don't have pain. So it's a cold disease, it's arthrosis, and they really have good results if they do it. And these are old ladies from time to time.
Merlin, how about you?
I really wish you hadn't asked me that question, because I feel such a fraud now. I guess I feel like I'm in a slightly schizophrenic world, in that my passion relates to Moxa. My professional passion has for Moxa has overcome my passion for acupuncture. But actually, in my own day-to-day clinic, in other words, this is nothing to do with Mox Africa, I just love acupuncture. I love being at the end of a needle with the patient at the other end. So I tend to use acupuncture. I think Sascha is likely to run away from my clinic. I'm a bit worried because he wouldn't smell enough. He wouldn't smell enough smoke, which it sounds terrible after everything that I've said about this. But I tend to use needles much more in my daily clinic than I do Moxa. But I'm not going to take a word back about what I said about Moxa because I really do think that Moxa doesn't just have something very, very significant to offer us as AcuMoxa practitioners, but it also has something very significant to offer the world today, particularly with the spectre of antimicrobial disease, which is growing larger and larger and more unpleasant. So I cannot underestimate the potential of the use of Moxa.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll just say a little bit about Sayoshi and Sayoshi TV, because our brief is to provide an online home for all practitioners of Japanese acupuncture of all styles. And some of these styles are pretty different in terms of theory and needling practice. But it strikes me after this discussion that Moxibustion could be a common thread running through all of these styles. And it could be that Moxa is the thing that unites disparate styles of acupuncture. So that's my thought for the day. I think that's where we're going to wrap things up for this episode of Japanese Acupuncture Today. Don't forget to subscribe to Sayoshi TV for more Japanese acupuncture content, and visit sayoshi.com to leave your email and to receive alerts about our launch later this year. And I'd like to thank in particular my learner guests, Sascha Groebe and Merlin Young, for joining me today and sharing their expertise and knowledge with us. Our next show is on fertility, so join us in 2 weeks' time for what will undoubtedly be a fascinating show. Until then, I'm Oran Kivity. So long.
Goodbye.